Hey guys, this is Elena from We Learn to Share. In this video, we're gonna cover the AP English Language and Composition Glossary of Literary and Rhetorical Devices. So we're gonna first look at the literary and rhetorical devices, and then we're gonna look at this definition, and then look at some examples listed in this page. So now let's start from the first one, which is the active voice. So, as you can understand from its literally, you can interpret that this is something that is very active. So, where the subject of a sentence performs the action. And of course, because the subject is performing the action, it will be more direct and oftentimes more preferred style of writing in most cases. So, for example, you would say that Anthony drove while Tony searched for the house. So, in this sentence, active voice is used because we can see that both Anthony and Tony, which are the subjects of the sentence, performing the action of driving and searching for maybe like a car over here and a house over here, right? And the opposite of active voice will, of course, be passive voice when the subject of the sentence receives the action. So if we change this sentence into a passive voice, it would be that the car, which was the object before, was driven by Anthony. And also this part could be changed to passive voice if you say that the house was searched by Tony, right? So passive voice over here is often overused and it results in lifeless writing. So when possible, try to use active voice. The second term we're going to look at is allusion. So allusion is basically alluding to something. So it's like an indirect reference to something, usually literary text, although it can be other things commonly known, such as plays, songs, historical events, with which the reader is supposed to be familiar. So remember allusion to be something that is indirect, something that you're alluding to someone. Allusion to indirect. Now, the next part, alterego. It's when the character that is used by the author to speak the author's own thoughts, when an author speaks directly to the audience through a character. So that is why it is called alter ego, because it's true or it's different from your actual ego. So when the author speaks directly to the audience through a character, the important part over here is that there is a character used, right? So in Shakespeare's last play, The Tempest, Shakespeare talks to his audience about his own upcoming retirement through the main character in the play, Prospero. So the author is actually directly speaking to the audience, not by himself appearing in the stage, but by using like the character that is that comes out in the play to speak to the audience. And do not confuse this with persona. The next, we're going to look at anecdote, which is a brief recounting of a relevant episode. Anecdotes are often inserted into fictional or non-fictional text as a way of developing a point or injecting humor. So over here, just gonna understand this like as a story. A brief recounting of a episode, a relevant episode. So it could be like a personal anecdote where you come out with your own story that might sound relevant to the whole storyline of this play or of this writing. Next is antecedent, which is the word, phrase, or clause referred to by a pronoun. The AP language exam occasionally asks for the antecedent of a given pronoun in a long complex sentence or in a group of sentences. So for example, if I could command the wealth of all the world by lifting my finger, I would not pay such a price for it. So an AP question might read, what is the antecedent for it? So you need to find what it means in this passage, right? And over here, it would be this whole. Like, command the wealth of all the world by lifting my finger. This would mean it. So you can remember the antecedent is something that is referred by a pronoun. Next, we're going to look at classicism, which is our literature characterized by a realistic view of people in the world, and sticks to the traditional themes and structures. And you can see romanticism in the couple more pages after. And you can just remember this as something classic, right? That sticks to the traditional themes. Now we're going to look at comic relief. In this part, you can just literally interpret from the wording itself, because it's a relief by something that is comical or something that is very funny or humorous. So that is why you have humorous over here, when a humorous scene is inserted into a serious story in order to lighten the mood somewhat. So that is why it is called comic relief, right? And so, for example, of a comic relief, it will be that the gatekeeper scene in Macbeth is an example of a comic relief we could find very prominently. And next, we're going to look at some dictions and types of dictions. So diction by itself is just word choice. So it's particularly as an element of style. So different types of words have significant effects on meaning. And an essay written in academic diction would be much less colorful, but perhaps more precise than street slang, right? So there are different dictions or word choices that the author needs to deploy in certain times accordingly to the types of writing. So there was something they will write with a more formal word choice than like a street slang if you're writing an essay or a journal that you need to present in a more formal situation, right? So you should be able to describe an author's diction, and this is very important because you should not write in your thesis that the author uses diction, because diction literally means just word choice. So you need to write what kind of diction, what type of diction, which we're going to look over here. And okay, so again, it says that you should not write in your thesis the author uses diction, because this is essentially saying the author uses words to write. Duh. So instead, describe the type of diction. For example, is the diction, is the word choice more formal or informal, like a slang, or ornate or plain? We're going to look at the type of dictions over here first, which is colloquial. Colloquial is like the ordinary or a familiar type of conversation. So a colloquialism is a common or familiar type of saying similar to an adage or an aphorism, which we're going to look at the next page. So just remember that colloquial is like a familiar type, something that is very familiar of conversation. Just remember C and C, okay? So colloquial is something that comes out in a conversation, so it's very familiar and ordinary. And next, the connotation. So connotation and denotation, let's look at this together. So connotation is basically the opposite of denotation. It's because, first of all, denotation, let's look at the denotation first. Denotation is like the literal and explicit meaning of the word without its connotation. So it's like an explicit meaning and something that comes out in a dictionary. You can remember this by D, same D and D, okay? So denotation is the dictionary, like a literal explicit meaning of a word. But in contrast to that, connotation is rather than the dictionary definition, which is denotation, the association is suggested by a word, so implied meaning rather than literal meaning, okay? So you can remember connotation as something that is not literal, something that is like implied, and something that is suggested by a word. So like the feelings of a word when you think of some word. For example, the policeman, cop, and the man all denote the same literal meaning of police officer, right? But each of them has a different connotation. So some might feel more negative, some might feel more positive, some might feel more formal than the other. So you can see how the connotation is something about the implied meaning, not the literal meaning like the denotation of a word. Next, we're going to look at jargon, which is the diction used by a group which practices a similar profession or activity. So you can see that how lawyers speak using particular jargon as to soccer players. So this means that it's kind of like a professional word that a certain group of people with a similar professional activity uses. So in other words, the people, like the ordinary people that are not lawyers or not soccer players, would not basically understand that word if they don't know what it is, because it's like a kind of professional word that the lawyers use by themselves, use for their own. And that is usually used in like a court. But these are very professional and somewhat kind of hard words that the people cannot literally know what that means in ordinary life when they don't have any knowledge about law or knowledge about the courts. So that is a jargon. And next is vernacular, which is like a language or dialect of a particular country, or language or dialect of a regional clan or group, or plain everyday speech. So it's kind of similar, this first and second definition, because it's kind of a particular thing that belongs to a certain country or belongs to a certain regional group. And also it could be the plain everyday speech that these particular people use in certain kind of regions or certain kind of countries. So this would be the end of this video for today. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.